episode of Everyday Eternal. Joining me today on the podcast are Jacob Corey, Matt Pavlik, and Sam Craven. And our topics today are going to include a recap of Star City Baltimore, and we're going to talk about some upcoming events. We're going to touch on kind of the evolution of the Deathblade deck, where they came from, what the components are, and we're going to wrap up with a reaction about Modern Masters, which hit recently. And it's our second episode, and if you listen to our first one, we apologize for any of the technical difficulties. I understand the sound quality wasn't quite there, but we were working hard using underpaid offshore labor to make sure that this podcast has higher quality sound. So thanks for coming back.
And also Sean O'Brien is your announcer here today.
That's right, I'm Sean O'Brien.
Let's dive right in. Star City Baltimore. We actually got to see a Legacy Open 2 weeks back-to-back, which is pretty exciting. Pretty good event, 280 players. And we actually saw blue-black Tezzerator win the whole pie.
No, that was the most recent. Baltimore was Esper Deathblade.
Oh, well, I'm a week behind. St. Louis, that is the event I'm looking for.
Yes.
St. Louis, Baltimore, it's really all the same, you know. It's fine.
I'm just happy to be able to watch Legacy on Sunday.
Yeah, there was the previous week in Baltimore, just to touch on, was I think almost half sneak show variants, right? With an Omnitel and a couple of sneak shows. So
quite a few of them, yeah.
we had a strict contrast this week. I think one sneak show made it in. But, yeah, as Jacob pointed out, the St. Louis was won by blue-black Tezzerator with Force and Chalice by Chris Anderson.
Also notable, we had no brainstorms in the final.
That is a pretty big deal, considering the rest of top 8 included brainstorms.
And I think you look at the list with both lists are trying to punish decks that live off of cantrips like that. Obviously, with the Tezzerator deck, trying to position the Chalice on one. With Death and Taxes being kind of a mana denial deck, trying to get a Thalia in play as quickly as possible. So both have pretty good matchups against traditional blue decks.
I mean, and then punishing all these decks further that are just cantripping to high heaven to try and get what they need to get. I mean, this deck is running... I mean, this Tezzerator deck could be running Abysses, but it's not, which makes me sad. However, they are running Lodestone Golem, which is like the absolute tits against anything playing, cheap cantrips. Chalice plus Lodestone Golem, have fun. Like, I would not want to play against this if I was running like Rug Delver or some other deck like that.
I would consider Lodestone Golem the mud version of Thalia.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, the list he's got here has an interesting number of one-ofs, and the reason he can run those one-ofs is because of Transmute Artifact. He also has some card movement with Thirst, and obviously the Planeswalkers. But I think you can see him kind of, although he doesn't have access to traditional cantrips, he can get at his one-ofs and two-ofs through the number of tutors he has, and he has card movement from Transmute, Thirst, and then Tezzerator, of course, which is Impulse on a stick.
I think Transmute is really interesting in this deck because, I mean, like, Transmute is not sacrifice, when you cast Transmute Artifact. It's if Transmute Artifact resolves, then sacrifice your garbage mana signet, whatever, to go for, if you wanted to, like your Baleful Strix or for your Ensnaring Bridge, or if you were running, like, Wormcoil Engine or something, which is pretty cool. So, I mean... And if you don't pay the mana difference, it goes to the graveyard. So I'm wondering if there's some possibility for some, like, Grixis Goblin Welder action. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, it does bin the artifact.
It even has the Thopter Foundry and sort of a meat combo to sustain against aggressive decks and even just overwhelm other control decks, which is kind of innovative in its own.
Well, we saw it, years ago with the Enlightened Tutor package blue-white control deck that would run that as a finisher, and that kind of fell out of favor. I think around the time Stoneforge Mystic became more popular, right? That was kind of the finisher of choice.
I mean, it's innovative with the use of transmute artifact.
Yeah, definitely. It's been tried before. I think in an environment where there's a little bit less force of will. If you want to look at some of these Esper lists and Esper Deathblade lists, that the actual net number of counterspells now is a little bit lower than it was in the past. Nobody's running Spell Snare, and as Matt pointed out, anyway, it's a low risk play because if it's countered, it's countered. So no card loss.
Sam, what do you think?
Well, I didn't actually get to watch much of the tournament because I was at work all day Sunday. But what I did see, my favorite part of watching Tezzerator was the unfortunate soul who asked if he could read Transmute Artifact. And for those of you who haven't seen what Transmute Artifact looks like, it's got about 185 words on it, and it doesn't do anything even remotely related to what it says on the card. And it was one of those situations where he played Transmute Artifact, and the guy asked, "Hey, can I read that?" And he says, "No, I'm going to call a judge."
Very nice.
Yeah, it's pointless to read cards printed in that era. It's almost just better off call a judge, find out what the card actually does.
And when a card is that confusing, you can often then just keep your City of Traders in play for multiple turns, even though it should have been sacked. So there was also some sloppy play going around, but
I think the most exciting thing for me was watching another Tin Fins player make top 8. This would make the second showing in top 8 after my Vegas performance back in March, with a list actually piloted in Desire Moxon. So big ups to Logan Crane for having the balls to play a degenerate deck like that.
I'm fairly certain though there's been some European top 8, so I'm fairly certain, like I said.
Yeah, but
so
no one cares about Europe. Come on, we're in America.
This is true, however.
that's what I thought. Probably got deeded like 10 times.
So what else about this this top 16 here from St. Louis? Like the Death and Taxes list seems pretty stock. I'm just opening it now. Like Mind Sensors, Flicker Wisps, Mangara.
I think the only thing that stands out to me really is his going in on Mindbreak Trap. I mean, I'm of the opinion that if you're going to play Mindbreak Trap, play 4. Playing 2 in a deck with no card manipulation or movement, it seems a little bit strange to me. You're either going to lose in the first couple of turns or you're not. So the hypergeometric distribution teaches us that you should have a maxed out number 4. So maybe it was card availability, I'm not sure, but just 2 Mindbreak Traps in the sideboard to me seems a little bit loose. If you want to commit to that card, commit to 4.
Maybe he didn't want to run 4. Like maybe he just wanted to split the Canonist Mindbreak Trap slot, just because Canonist is like good here but not here, whereas Mindbreak Trap. I don't know what his thinking was. But
That's sensible.
He's got like 4 slots in the board.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe he tested or decided, or maybe he only owns 2 Mindbreak Traps. But that's the way I always feel about Mindbreak Trap, unless it's in a blue deck, of course. But in a deck like this, where your opening 7 is going to be your opening 7, and there's not a whole lot you can do to massage it.
I feel like Mindbreak Trap is a wasted sideboard slot, considering he's got the Enlightened Tutor to find all the hate pieces against Storm combo.
Yeah. So he's literally banking on that, helping him on the draw in a game where I might just as well run White Leyline or Silence. I mean, I don't know. But maybe it served him well throughout the day.
One thing I find interesting about this top 16 is that the lack of omniscience. There's been a lot of hype recently about how this deck is unbeatable, it has good matchups all across the board, and we see a top 16 that is effectively a slice of Legacy from 3 months ago. A lot of tempo decks, some show and tell decks, Storm combo with Ad Nauseam Tendrils, as well as Elves combo, even some Stifle Knot showing up in 9th place. So it seems like a pretty balanced top 16 without the inclusion of omniscience.
Certainly, if you were going to build a Legacy Gauntlet, this would be a good starting point for that.
Yeah, there's
Except
a couple
Tezzerator.
of mid-range decks.
Except Tezzerator.
Yeah. I think the Omniscience deck, there's been some chatter online about how it's unbeatable and how if everyone was playing it, it would be banned. And I think that argument is a slippery slope. I mean, you can apply the argument of it's a gentleman's agreement. We don't all play it to a lot of decks. And if half the field played it, WotC would find an excuse to ban anything. It would also percolate up into top eights simply because half the field is playing it. So I think it's a powerful deck. I think it can lose to itself often, and I do think there is somewhat of a gentleman's agreement not to play it. I know a subsegment of the legacy population likes to have a game, likes to actually have a game of Magic involving combat and other things. So if you kind of throw those people out of the pool of people who want to play that deck or want to play Legacy, maybe there's just a natural uh, subpopulace that just doesn't want to play a deck like Omnitail because it's a little bit, banal.
Yeah, my own experience with show and tell decks is that they are kind of fun and powerful, but after about the fourth or fifth game where you're just doing the same exact redundant game plan, it gets a little stale. Doesn't feel like you have a lot of strategic depth to the deck. It's just you jam out show and tell, you resolve it, and put whatever uncastable fatty or enchantment into play and proceed to enter the scoop phase.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
agree. The level of intellectual stimulation that you get with show and tell. Not to say that anybody's bad for playing show and tell, or no, this is not a judgment on the people who do. However, I have to agree with you, Jacob, that playing the deck is pretty damn boring. Like, I don't care what your flavor is. I think Omni's a little bit more interesting to play. It's a little bit more intricate. But like the whole let's just jam Gristlebrand and hopefully ride it to victory. I don't know.
Well, I am a man after the heart of Grizzlebrand. That card is absurdly powerful and should, for its own sake, be banned from Legacy.
So what you're saying is you enjoy drawing cards.
Yeah, that's right. I enjoy winning with my deck in my hands, except I'm going to go through the forceful activation of multiple Grizzlebrands. Paying 7 life, gaining some life, paying 7 more life, maybe Tendrils for 8, draw 7 more cards, discard my Emrakul, loop into infinity. See, that's fun and interesting because each iteration of that type of game at least leads to different challenges. Whereas Enter the Infinite Omniscience, you literally just push a button, draw your deck, and proceed to win in one of 3 prescribed ways.
Yeah, I feel like I can attack Tin Fins, and you and I can have a match where I'm attacking your graveyard, maybe I'm attacking your hand, you're defending your hand, you're defending your graveyard. There's a little bit of gamesmanship in there. I feel like the Omnitail player who sacks into his white Leyline in game 2 or 3 and has the prerequisite lands and a couple of cantrips, there's not as much game there, to be had. But that's personal opinion. Some people probably enjoy kind of setting up the combo. I don't know if there's an arbitrary way to measure the complexity or depth of a combo deck, but it really is just a kind of a 2-card combo.
Some could say the amount of fun you have is the amount of fun that you take away from your opponent. So
yeah,
and that's why I play blue-white.
Under that school of thought, Ponza is the best deck to play.
Well then.
A couple of interesting things. Just barely finishing in 9th place was an amazingly cool deck with the new Scavenge Legend. And this deck also featured the full 4 Death's Shadows. And several Shocklands not as a budget choice.
Yeah, I think I looked at that mana base and it included one of each on-color duel from Revised and one of each on-color duel from Ravnica.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. And he ran 3 Varolz the Scar-Striped, and basically it was a Stifle Knot shell that we've seen for years with Hand Disruption, Stifles, Daze, Brainstorm, and then and Dark Confidant. But he's augmented that plan with a more traditional mid-range plan of Deathrite Shamans, Tarmogoyfs, and then 3 Varolz the Scar-Stripe, too, for our listeners who don't play EDH or whatever other format this man has been featured in. Each creature in your graveyard has Scavenge, and Scavenge cost is equal to its mana cost. Sacrifice another creature, regenerate Varolz the Scar-Stripe. So, if one can get a Dreadnought in his yard, either by just casting the Dreadnought and allowing its trigger to consume itself, or I guess in a pinch, discarding it out of your own hand, or having it countered or abrupt decayed or whatever. That Dreadnought now becomes a one colorless mana, put 12 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, which is pretty sick to think that your Dark Confidant could be a 14/13 coming across the board. So
I'm curious to know how many times the player's name was Gage Bunting. How many times he actually cast Death's Shadow and let it die, and then
yeah,
scavenge it for 13/13.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we should reach out to him and find out.
I am kind of a little shocked to see that there's no Snuff Out in the deck. Possibly, or even Dismember, just as a way as extra creature removal that can...
Vendetta?
Vendetta? No, Dismember.
Oh, Dismember.
Which more or less destroys every creature in the creature-on-creature features.
Vendetta fails these days because of Deathrite Shaman. I can't imagine fanning out my opening 7 and seeing a Vendetta and having my opponent just go Deathrite Shaman go, me wishing to God I'd played Disfigure or Dismember or anything. So.
Even the lack of Gitaxian Probe and possibility of Cabal Therapy makes me kind of wonder if there's still a lot of unexplored room with this deck. Like, I wonder if it needs this many creatures, too.
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. You have 7 creatures that are just mid-rangey creatures. I mean, Varolz is your combo, but this is the first time I've seen a deck like this that just jams Tarmogoyfs because he's good, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say the Tarmogoyf seems like the most cuttable creature right there. Like, I would want Dark Confidant to draw my Daze Stifle Nut Draw all day, but, like, Tarmogoyf? Eh. Like, he's my wall? Cool. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and this deck is very, very land light, 19 with 4 Shamans, and I mean, it's in the 1-2 range, but and it's running 4 Wastelands, so this kind of mana base, you'd have to be a true pro, as they say, to top 8 with a mana base like this. But
let's move on to upcoming events. Sean, maybe you want to talk about Eternal Weekend. That's been spoiled since our last podcast.
Yeah, so for those of you unfamiliar with or haven't been to what was formerly known as Legacy and Vintage Championships, they've been held at Gen Con for the last umpteen years, and although there was some debate as to whether or not they were truly the World Championships, they were always 2 very fun, very well-represented tournaments. It was in North America anyway, probably the largest vintage tournament, non-proxy vintage tournament in the country. So there was a good cast of characters from the vintage community, if you can call the vintage community a community. It's more like a small, semi-abandoned village, but...
I was going to say, are 12 people considered a village?
Yeah. So anyway, the typically was held at Gen Con, which was fun because I enjoyed going to Gen Con for a variety of other reasons, but one of the things that hindered the whole process was that there's a pretty high barrier to entry just to get to Gen Con. The hotel process is expensive. You have to buy a badge to the actual con to get in. It wasn't like you could just walk up and play Vintage Champs for the entry fee. So, consequently, WotC replaced Legacy and Vintage Champs at Gen Con with several other really, really great events, but there was no champs listed when the events got spoiled at the beginning of the month. So there was a bit of an uproar from the vintage community about whether there was actually going to be a Vintage Champs and a Legacy Champs. WotC has corrected that, and they have announced Eternal Weekend, which will be held and sponsored by Top Deck Games. And the owner of Top Deck Games, or one of the people who works there anyway, is a guy named Nick Koss, and he's a pretty active vintage proponent. He's spent a lot of time. He's passionate about it. So I think it's going to come off really, really well. So they're lowering the barrier to entry. Now it's going to be in Philadelphia, November 1st through the 3rd. We're going to have Legacy on Saturday, Vintage on Sunday. Anyone who hasn't been to Philly, super easy to get to. Trains go in there, airport. In addition, no buying a badge. It's downtown in the convention center, which is a great, great, great place to stay. You got the Reading Market, all kinds of great food and drink. So I think it's going to end up benefiting those two tournaments in the long run. I think there'll be more attendance rather than less attendance. So I think it's going to be great.
Sounds like a blast. I wish I could go.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I agree, though, that it is there was some negativity associated with the announcement. It came a little late because, like you said, the barrier to entry at Gen Con, you got to get your badge, get your hotel. Realistically, you're looking at a $500 entry fee to play in Vintage Champs, and a lot of people had already paid that fee when they made the announcement we're not going to be at Gen Con this year. And I think it would have Wizards like to make these big announcements. Hey, we're doing this cool thing. But it was one of those things they really should have done it before badges and hotels went up for sale. And there's a lot of people who are really upset that they had spent all this money and now, there will be a tournament at Gen Con, but it's not going to be Champs, and they wanted to play at Champs.
Yeah, that's
I'll be honest.
Fair. Yeah.
I was looking to go to the Legacy Champs. I was gonna, consider pricing it out, flying out, booking a hotel, and I'm glad that I hadn't yet because otherwise that would have been, $500 to $800 down the drain.
To be honest, Gen Con, your money's not going to go down the drain. We're talking first world problems here. There's like 3 vintage tournaments. One's for an uncut sheet of antiquities. The other one is a entry. First place gets entry into an 8-man draft where you draft packs from every set beginning with beta forward. So, it's not like winning those tournaments is going to give you some Homelands packs and a handshake. The prizes are actually pretty sweet. So, but I agree. There's some people who just wanted to play in Champs. I know several people that I met at Bazaar Moxon who had gone to Gen Con to play Champs. Actually, one of the ex-champs I played against in Vintage at Bazaar Moxon, a Japanese guy won it in 2010 maybe. I'll have to look. He won the Emerald. Anyway, the Moxon Open. He had to cancel his travel plans. And for him, it's a big deal. He's got to ask for time off far, far, far in advance. Obviously, the plane ticket's absurd. So, yeah, to Sam's point, some people probably did get hosed who aren't interested in the rest of Gen Con.
And finally, on the vintage note, we have a Proxy Vintage event during the weekend of Grand Prix Las Vegas. This is unofficial, so it's not connected with the official venue. But it will be hosted at We Play Games, We as in WII, just like 5 minutes out from Las Vegas Strip. Essentially an exhibition event highlighting the format. This is full proxy, so you don't have to actually own any cards to play in this event. I'll be out there, maybe a few some internet people. I believe some of the Team Serious guys may swing by for some vintage action. I'm probably going to test out my new -6 deck in Vintage, courtesy of Ben Perry. So it should be a blast. Get to see some power being slung and have some fun learning the format.
Are you going to play any proxies?
I may proxy up World Gorger Dragon. Just maybe even...
That's painful.
Yeah, it is banned in Legacy, so why would I ever touch it? And you can't get it in Korean, so I automatically disqualifies it from my collection.
I could FedEx you my German dragons. They're written in the language of hate.
That'll be actually on Sunday at 2 p.m. At We Play Games. So if you didn't manage to make day 2 and are not satisfied with the offerings for the side events, swing by. It should be pretty good entertainment. It's $5 entry. It's probably the best entertainment you can get in Vegas for the amount of fun you'll have. So come check it out. Come say hi.
So with that, maybe we'll move on and talk about Deathblade?
Sounds good.
Deathblade.
So, as most of you may have seen from the last couple of results before St. Louis, Baltimore and whatever American city was in before, Esper Deathblade has been doing decently well. Top slots, I think in Baltimore took 1st, 8th, 12th, and probably, a good portion of the top 32 was a lot of Esper Deathblade. So we just thought we should kind of break down why this is kind of suddenly coming up and what's up with it and how you beat it.
Do you want to take a step back real quick for our listeners, since we're such a new podcast, and kind of run through the evolution of the blade archetype. Kind of starts as blue-white Stoneforge, Stoneblade. Back when Mental Misstep was legal, I think it kind of reached its zenith. Um, and then kind of moving on to Esper Stoneblade, adding black for hand disruption and sometimes token generation.
Yeah, we saw this about March of 2012 with really its breakout performance at Grand Prix Indianapolis, won by Tom Martell. One of the key innovations he did there was add Lingering Souls as a multi-purpose and kind of an aggro spell to go along with the equipment package. And that was really successful, mostly because of the Black Splash. Really gave a lot of game against the up-and-coming Maverick from that tournament.
And didn't that also win Grand Prix Denver? Was that
Yeah,
He did.
won by Vidyanta Wijaya. Good local player around here. He's been hitting up the Grand Prix circuit recently, trying to make it back onto the Pro Tour.
So we've evolved through those two, and now these latest iterations are now adding green, a splash of green for Deathrite Shaman, hence the death in Deathblade.
Right, and we saw this in Breakout really in the Star City Invitational Tournament in Atlanta around the early April. And this deck featured really a collection of three-color good stuff. It's got Dark Confidant, Deathrite Shaman, Snapcaster Mage, and Stoneforge Mystic. So kind of combining a lot of the tempo strategies from blue, white, and black. In addition to that, it has Jace the Mind Sculptor and Liliana the Veil to provide some permanent sources of advantage. And then one of the key features is actually lacking Force of Will. Part of this, I think, is more so to do with the metagame of the Invitational, which is expected to be more control and tempo heavy rather than combo. So Brian Braun-Duan made a pretty good metagame call to cut Force of Will entirely from the deck and put it into the sideboard.
And even still, you're seeing a lot of decks, they'll play Force of Will, but they're not playing the full four. Some of them play 3 with one in the side, or 2 with one in the side, or even I've seen 2, which I guess is just, again, it's a metagame call, and what do I want to put in? Do I want a third Liliana, or do I want a Force of Will just in case?
I think another feature of this deck, if you look at the one, it evolves a little bit when we get into Star City Nashville, but sticking with kind of its emergence in the Invitational, it's a deck that can legitimately power out double blue spells, double black spells, and still run Wastelands, which would be almost unheard of a few years ago. You'd get Wastelanded out of every game, but Deathrite Shaman allows that.
The addition, like when you were running the old Esper Stoneblade lists, and you were running like 8 creatures, you were running like 4 Stoneforges, 4 Snapcasters, maybe a Vendilion Clique or 2, and you were just running control spells. And now, I guess they've kind of learned from all the black, green, whatever mid-range decks that are all running Dark Confidant and Deathrite Shaman right now that, hey, this plan's pretty darn good. How about we kind of go with this and see where we can go with it? And so far, it's been doing quite well.
And really, it's come full circle, because if you look all the way back at the traditional blue-white Stoneblade was really popular in Atlanta. Especially at our weeklies, getting 25 to 30 players, a smattering of people who queued for the Pro Tour. Pretty decent competition, and blue-white Stoneblade was full-on control. It was about resolving Stoneforge and protecting it with counter magic. Now full circle here. If you look at the list from the Invitational, besides hand disruption, there's really no way main deck to actually protect his Stoneforge. So he's relying almost entirely on his Thoughtseizes and his IOKs to clear out removal and or counter spells and resolve the Stoneforge, which is a completely different tactic than the very first versions of these decks, which almost, besides the Mystics and the Batterskull, don't really share a lot.
Well, the first versions of the decks actually needed Stoneforge Mystic alive, or just a creature. I mean, they were only playing 8 of them, right? So, I mean, now you've got a situation where, like, okay, if my Stoneforge Mystic dies, this is bad. However, I have other creatures to actually go pick up a piece of equipment and go for it. Whereas, back in the day, it was like, well, no, I actually just stopped Swords of Plowshares. And I mean, that's why they were playing, like, Mental Misstep and, Force of Will. And
Some were even playing Days at one point. Like, it wasn't unheard of for Blue Whites to play Days. I do think now, though, it causes you to look at Batterskull. How many times is actually yanking Batterskull the right play? And just watching some video, I've seen players play this Deathblade deck with no way to protect their Stoneforge, yet they snap grab Batterskull. Um, I don't know how often that's a losing play or a winning play, but it seems like without a way to protect the Stoneforge Mystic, that Batterskull starts to kind of lose its luster a little bit.
Sam, what are your thoughts on the inclusion of, let's say, Dark Confidant versus the Lingering Souls that had been pretty big going into the beginning of the year?
Well, it's like we said, it's going back to just kind of changing up a little bit. They're both good strategies. Lingering Souls, obviously, really good with equipment, having lots of dudes around, and you've got chump blockers and all that kind of thing. But being that, as we said, we don't have nearly as much of a control aspect, I think that makes Dark Confidant a lot more important than it used to be, because without control, we just got to jam creatures and spells and hope something gets through. So that drawing twice a turn makes everything a lot better. And I've picked up the deck in the last week or two just to play around it, and landing a Bob it's pretty much unbeatable. They've got a lot to dig back from when you look at everything else you've got, because you're going to play a Bob, turn 2 or 3, and you've Thoughtseized them or Inquisitioned them once or twice, and they've just got a really, really big hole to dig themselves out of.
okay, so I think especially in this deck, because you have Dark Confidant, but like every single card you're drawing into in this deck is good. I mean, with the exception of, say, like Thoughtseize or Inquisition, later in the game, I mean, you're drawing into some sort of value creature, like, so another Stoneforge Mystic, Snapcaster, Dark Confidant, Deathrite Shaman, or piece of equipment, removal, or Planeswalker. Like, that seems fine to me.
Yeah, and if you look a week forward, the deck kind of evolves a bit, and the finals of Nashville come down to to call it a mirror match would be inaccurate. One is packing Force of Will, the other one isn't. One that's using Force of Will skews Liliana of the Veil, and has a little bit more of a stable mana base, and ends up placing first. The one with Force of Will is piloted by Lauren Nolan. Do you guys think that it's going to start to curve back, since we didn't actually see this past week at St. Louis, we didn't see any placements by Esper Stoneblade or Esper Deathblade? Do you think the way back is to put Force back in, not be so greedy by playing Jace and Liliana, or maybe somewhere in between?
I think it's really, really hard, at least for me, to play 4 5-mana spells in a Bob that's playing, or in a deck that's playing 4 Bobs. And I think that might be part of the reason that once Bob came about, that Force of Will started getting cut, because 5 life in a deck that's trying to play a fairly long game, that's a lot to lose.
I'm actually going to go ahead and disagree. Not to be a contrarian, but I did get the chance to pilot this at a local event, and our local events are typically run over with combo decks. So, being cognizant of that, I included the Force of Wills, understanding that, hey, this Bob's probably going to deal me a lot of damage, but at the same time, that's what Batterskull helps to offset. So, landing a Dark Confidant and a Stoneforge Mystic together almost guarantees that you set up kind of a free card drawing, even if you do flip over those Force of Wills. And because of those Dark Confidants, you're now guaranteeing that you have extra cards in your hand, making the disadvantage from Force of Will an acceptable drawback.
And you can be a little bit more liberal in going and getting Batterskull if you have Force to back up your Mystic, whereas in the other list, if you have an Iocade or Thoughtseize or removal, and you just play Mystic blind into Batterskull and let it get swords or destroyed, you're kind of stuck with a Batterskull in your hand till you can brainstorm it away, or maybe inevitably get to 5 mana. I think we reviewed a match on camera last week where this deck was a little bit mana tight. Really had no hope of actually hard casting a Batterskull. And so the list with Force of Will actually gives you some ways to protect your Mystic. It makes Batterskull more of a real plan.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty fair assessment.
So what do we think the weaknesses are of this deck? How do we attack this and make sure that as it's becoming a larger and larger part of the meta, how do we make sure that it's not beating us?
So one thing I noticed particularly about this deck is it has a relatively hard time against the red deck. If you take a look at the mana base, there's not a single basic land included most of the time, and even some of the time, 2 or 3 basic lands are not going to be enough to offset, for instance, price of progress. So typically when these big blue decks in Legacy start cropping up in 3 and 4 color and start splashing all these off-color good stuff cards, a very timely bolt, price of progress, fire blast you is more than enough to just put them away.
I think this deck is also really weak in the fact that, I mean, I felt like when Esper Stoneblade was deck, it was a pretty good control deck in the format. There are very few other control decks that were doing well because you had Lingering Souls, you had equipment. I mean, 43 lands and maybe like Agrolong or something were a bit better, but they're pretty fringe, right? So this moving towards, in the spectrum of aggro to control, moving more towards the mid-range, I think there may be other mid-range decks that are doing it better. Like, for example, Jund with Punishing Fires. Like, all you have are X1s. So, like, Dark Confidant is a 2-1, Death Ratum is a 1-2, Snapcaster, 2-1, Stoneforge Mystic, 1-2, and if you're playing the Clique, it's a 3-1. So, I mean, Punishing Fires is getting pretty good.
Even Grim Lavamancer from both Burn or Jund can put this deck away pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
You're also running a decent amount of 2s. Sweepers like Engineered Explosives are pretty good against it, especially if you can recur them. And I think the mana base. The list at Baltimore and the 2 lists at Nashville both moved to have one of each basic besides a forest in their base. So they can play a little bit around with basics to get some breathing room against Wasteland or Price of Progress. But I still think attacking their mana base is a vulnerability. This deck can't necessarily establish 4 to 5 lands out on the field, without being vulnerable to Wasteland, like a deck like Miracles could, which sort of has an impervious mana base.
I think another way to attack this deck is, like we were talking about the creatures, we're talking about the mana base, but I mean this is primarily a creature equipment deck. So I mean, if you're either better in the control element or just better in the creature combat, you're just going to clean up. The Jace is here if it's like, oh, you have, your Batterskull out, you have your Dark Confidant, you have a Death Ratum, and the Jace is kind of sitting behind these guys, and you're fate sealing them away. It's not like the Jace is the all-in plan like in the other control decks, like say a Bug Landstill deck or something like that.
Or a deck with Lingering Souls. Like, this deck doesn't really have a way to defend Jace that well. All these dudes are terrible. They're not good blockers,
I agree. I think Jace in this deck acts more as a tempo recovery. So either bouncing your opponent's creatures to connect with yours to activate GT or deal some damage with Batterskull, and really draw some extra cards with the Brainstorm ability just to recover and clean up the card quality.
I think a card like Thalia is actually really good against this deck. We saw in the replay last week that, I mean, even though the Deathblade deck was, kind of wavering on their mana, I mean, they're a deck that needs to be able to cast, Brainstorm, a Thoughtseize, a Ponder, Swords Plowshares. Like, being able to tax them like that with, say, a Thalia, which also has First Strike, which is going to be insane against all of their small guys. Like, that's where you want to be. Creatures with First Strike, creatures with Trample, tax effects, stuff like that.
Yeah, she also beats all of their men in combat, basically. So, in addition to being a tax effect, they can't block her very, there's very few profitable blocks this deck can make against Thalia.
And let's not underestimate also the ability of a good combo pilot to defeat this deck. Really, the only tools that the Esper Stoneblade deck and even the Deathblade decks have to fight good combo in the first game is 3 Force of Wills on the draw, and only 5 discard spells on the play. After sideboard, it gets a little bit better. You go up to 4 Force of Wills. You go up to maybe a few Spell Pierce, Fluster Storm,
Or Thought Seizes.
extra discard, and Meddling Mage.
But I mean, as you may know, as a Maverick pilot, if you're trying to sit there and be like, oh, have a few little things to try and disrupt the combo deck, I mean, they're just gonna go get their bounce spell for your Meddling Mage, or they're gonna duress you before they go off, or silence. I feel like this deck against a silence, if the test player starts to silence you and starts to go off, you've got your 1 Force of Will, and you're like,
Yeah.
cool story.
Yeah, I mean the decks that fare well against combo are usually those that can attack their hand and combat them on the stack. When you have both of those, stuff for combo to win. When you've got so little ways to interact on the stack, it's going to be tough to deal with a deck like Tez that can silence you and just do what it wants. But it's this. We went back all the way to the beginning. This deck was a metagame call, right? So. Eschewing Force of Will was the first sign that the initial pilots didn't really, didn't think combo was going to be a factor.
I think that's a really good point regarding that this deck's not going to excel in those matchups where you do need those Force of Will. This is essentially trying to be a blue-based, mid-range, board control type of deck. And for that purpose, it's fantastic. If you're going into a metagame filled, let's say, with Sneak Show combo decks and Storm combo decks, you're likely not going to perform as well as you'd hope.
And I still feel like against the decks that are running against other BGX decks, like you're running against Jund or you run against Junk, it's not like the easiest matchup. It is not as easy of a matchup as it was when you were playing Esper Stoneblade, because you were a better control deck. Now you're playing the mirror match, and Junk has Tarmogoyf, and if you're sitting there on your Snapcaster Mage as your blocker, you're only gonna get so far with that.
Right. In a lot of ways, this deck is blue junk. I mean, especially if you look at the ace.
That's exactly what I've been calling it.
Tombstone.
Yeah.
Tombstone was
Just
blue junk.
good stuff thrown together.
Yeah. At the 8th place deck in Baltimore actually had I think it had a Miser's Counterspell main, but it actually ran Tarmogoyf. I guess he said to himself, well, as long as I'm in green, I'll play a decent creature, on the back of all these other guys I've got. But it still ran a bunch of spells with double blue, like Jace. I think he ran the full 4 Jace, Click.
And Cleeks.
Yeah, so, it really was just blue junk.
It kind of reminds me a lot of the variations we saw in the Tempo decks about 4 or 5 years ago. Essentially, you had the blue shell, which is Force Will, Brainstorm, Ponder, and
Days.
And Days, yeah, of course. And you had to pick between essentially, am I going to play red for Lightning Bolt, or am I going to play black for Hand Disruption? And ultimately, out of that conflict, the red version, which we know as Tempo Threshold or Canadian Threshold, won out, just because it's much more efficient and it has much more reach than the black variations. I wouldn't be surprised to see a red version of the Deathrite Shaman deck splashing white, or even blue, emerge as victorious as we see the evolution of this deck continue.
I wouldn't be surprised to see me sleeving up some Blood Moons, because I'm sick of it.
I agree 100%. Going back to, we said that red was a big weakness. Between Blood Moon and being able to Lightning Bolt their turn 1 Deathrite Shaman, I agree that the mana base is 100% what you attack, and if you're dropping down a Blood Moon and they've got 2 basics and their only other mana producer you Lightning Bolted, they're in a heap of trouble.
And this deck absolutely caves to Chalice on 1 as well. Any Dragon Stompy deck that could actually get a slightly decent draw against these decks, I think, would blow them out.
I mean, also, too, just having a deck that, totally mucks their creature plan, or is the better Jace deck. For example, Bug Land still against this deck is a joke. I mean, I understand, like, you have to get up to Pernicious Deed and you have to actually survive until you deed them. But I mean, it's not hard to be like, deed on 2, like, oh, oops, your entire team is gone.
Yeah, you're not having to deed for 5 or anything here, and uh, standstill against them is pretty brutal too.
Well, I'm definitely hoping to see the evolution of this deck continue over the next coming weeks. I know M14 might change things up, either with a ban or restriction, or just new printings might might throw some new gasoline into the fire. So,
I'm wondering if there's a possibility that, I mean, if this deck is gonna start to evolve more, like, does Knight of the Reliquary become a factor again? Why? Mazavith, shutting off their equipment, and Tower of the Magistrate are very, very good.
And wasting them out.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Again, going back to their land, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing that definitely helps out the fight against Knight of the Reliquary is the abundance of Deathrite Shaman. One of the key features and one of the key strengths, really, of Knight of the Reliquary is being able to grow large while still being able to be disruptive. And the more you waste your opponent who has Deathrite Shaman, the more fuel you're giving them to continue to produce the mana that you just destroyed. So I feel like it's a little bit of a challenge between Deathrite Shaman versus Knight of the Reliquary, and of course the cheaper, more efficient efficient card is going to win out in the long run, as we see in the metagame play out.
I can't ever remember a time, and I'm older than dirt. I can't ever remember a time in Eternal Magic when the tension between attacking the graveyard as a resource and building your deck with the graveyard as a resource has been so. There's been so much tension between those two kind of overarching plans. Like, obviously, over the years, the value of the graveyard as a zone has gone up. I mean, that goes without saying. But I think we're reaching an interesting point now where you're making this conscious choice as you begin to design a deck around whether or not the graveyard's going to be a resource. And if it's not, you have access to the most powerful, hosers of that zone ever printed, right? I mean, rest in peace, kind of being the poster child now. But it's just interesting around so many decks now that are just relying on the graveyard. Maybe the rest in peace Helm deck, maybe that's well positioned to if Esper Deathblade starts to kind of climb in popularity. It's just interesting. There's so much tension between wanting to actually use your graveyard as a resource and having such simple, powerful tools to just completely nullify that strategy. But of course, cutting yourself off in the meantime. So
That's a really interesting point, Sean, and really when you think about it that way, it's kind of surprising that you don't see more graveyard hate in sideboards and even in mainboards when you're right, it's kind of, there's a lot of stuff that's broken down. Do you use the graveyard or not? And if you're not using it, why would you not want to hose it?
And in the Knight of the Reliquary point, like, if I was putting together a green-white aggro deck from the ground up now, I might eschew the graveyard altogether and just play Rest in Peace because it punishes so many decks. Maybe play Loxodon Smiter because once I've punished your graveyard against a Rug deck or any other Tarmogoyf deck, my Smiter is going to be the biggest guy on the board. And I've got game against discard strategies. It's just interesting. It's such a ubiquitous resource now that maybe attacking it in your main deck it could be a strategy for taking it out of a tournament if you guess the metagame right. Of course, it's complete blanks against Omnitel and some other things, but.
Or if people are assuming that their Deathrite Shamans are enough to keep somebody's graveyard intact, perhaps playing Dredge and just running over them is also a legitimate strategy.
Yeah. If you look at these decks, I mean, they've you're talking about Deathbright and 2 Surgicals in the sideboard, which is not enough to beat Dredge.
What? Sorry, I'm on my 3rd glass of scotch. I'm like starting to lose it.
Good job.
All right. Well, on that note, we can rant about Modern Masters.
Man, I loved sitting in the store watching people open Modern Masters and not get shit.
I mean,
I'm such an asshole.
They were selling them for $15 US, and there was a kid who pulled red poop dragon from Kamigawa. I don't even know his name, and like a mole drifter for $15. And I broke it to him that he could have just bought 15 red poop dragons for the price of the pack he just paid, and perhaps made a hat out of them because I mean, it's basically home run or just complete wipeout with those packs. It's when your retailer is charging $15 anyway.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
getting the box for like 2, so it's not too bad, like slightly above MSRP. So I mean, like I think I'm still winning, but the people who are paying like 300 a box are just like,
Definitely. I actually considered getting a box because I really want to draft the set, but you can't draft the set unless one person owns all the cards, because otherwise everyone's going to take the best stuff, and that's not nearly as interesting as if everyone tries to build a really badass deck.
So I told my friends, with regards to the set, I'm only going to pay retail. So I will only pay $6.95 per pack, and any booster box I will only pay $170. Any price above that, it's just flat out gouging, considering most stores get the boxes for about $80.
I mean, I can't put into words how small of a crap I give about an English language new bordered abortion reprint set. I mean, this is like, if you're playing with these cards, you're just, I don't know.
you're poor.
You're just
It's
poor.
fine.
I mean,
I
you're just-
really feel like we should just save this for when we get to the recording part of it, because we're already kind of just ranting about it.
Fuck it, let's just have this be the session, and
Yeah,
then we'll
we'll
tack
just
it on at the
cut out
end
the
as
whole
like
part.
freebies.
Perfect.
I mean, honestly, if somebody beats me with a fucking new frame Tombstalker, I might just fucking rip it up, go behind the goddamn counter, and buy them a Future Sight one, and then fucking concede, because, I mean, it's just humiliating.
Now, I do have to say that it is kind of odd seeing an Archimedes in a new frame,
I
considering
haven't actually seen it yet.
it looks...
It's cool.
You're like,
It's
oh,
odd.
it looks...
You're not used to it. Same with Termagoyf. You see it and you're like, the Termagoyf is different because it's different art, but like the new Narcomoeba, you see it and you're like, oh, it's a Narcomoeba, but something's off about that Narcomoeba.
Yeah, it's not Russian.
Well, that too. I'm pretty sad, Panda, about the fact that it's not in Russian or Korean or anything. It's yeah, just giant what the fucks. However, M14 Scavenging Ooze, Russian
Scavenging Ooze, yes, it's gonna be in every language now.
That's an interesting pimp question. Like, typically you want the oldest set symbol, but sometimes in that case you have to choose an inferior language. So I run German oozes because they're basically the most pimp ones I think you can get. So now I'm going to face what we would call a tough life choice in that I'll have access to Korean and Russian oozes, but they will have some fucking god-awful M14 symbol on them. So
Alright, so I know we said we don't want to do the speculation game, but I'm just curious, if a regular ooze was at 20 before this announcement, what is a foil foreign ooze going to end up going for 6 months or a year from now?
$100.
Yeah.
It's usually about 2 or 3 for a desired foreign language, and then usually double for foil.
agree.
But
Yep.
it is exciting to have like a foil Scavenging Ooze for those who enjoy Pokemon cards. But those who know me and those who probably don't know me personally but know me by name or even just by photos of my collection, Korean Scavenging Ooze will actually be updated to my now decrepit Maverick list.
Maybe you can get them altered and have the Plane Chase logo painted over the M14 logo.
At this point, I'm just considering taking a white eraser and removing the expansion symbol altogether. Just having a big white blur over the expansion symbol.
This is not the expansion symbol you're looking for. That's all.
This section labeled, Why the Guys on Everyday Eternal Are Better Than You.
Elitist Assholes 101.
I mean, I'm so
Seems
fucking
fine.
bored with buying cards and like have so little left that I want to buy that I just buy a new playmat every fucking week. I mean, that's true fucking boredom with collecting cards. I mean, I'm addicted to inked playmats. I may get a playmat of me playing on a playmat as my next playmat.
Playmatception.
Or actually,
I think it would be fun if you got enough that you had a different one for every game. Like, you finish a game, be like, excuse me one moment, I have to get my Game 2 playmat out.
God, how sick would that
Where you
be?
switch
I have
from
to
like
get my Game 2 playing against Countertop one. That's a different one than my Game 2 playing against Junk.
One
I
time
can get a
use
playmat.
it
with
goes
each
from
police
Terminator
academy.
playmat to Commando playmat.
Yeah, I can move from movie to movie, you know what I mean? Like, start off with a New Hope playmat, move into Empire, and then finish off with Jedi for a possible Game 3.
And when you just get really pissed, that's when you take out the prequels?
Yeah, well, I give them to my opponent if he doesn't have a playmat. I give him some fucking humiliating, Anakin as a boy savior playmat. And then Game 2, I give him a Jar Jar Binks playmat as Senator. And then Game 3, I give him one-armed Anakin crawling up the gravel, screaming at Obi-Wan playmat.
Now this is pod racing.
Have you thought about a Furby playmat just to give all of your opponents?
No. I had this this quasi hentai porn playmat that I got at Gen Con. So I'm sitting down at Vintage Champs, and I turn around and I lost my playmat. I had a Galactus playmat forever, and it's literally like 10 minutes till I gotta sit down and play another match, and I'm terrified because I lost my playmat. Luckily, I didn't lose any cards or anything like that. But so anyone who's been to Gen Con knows that it's like the running of the obese. I mean, trying to run anywhere in Gen Con is impossible because you're just surrounded by human meat. So I run out of the collectible card game hall, and the collectible card game hall into the dealer hall. There's a direct door there, and I just go to the first booth that I find there, and it's dude who did Deathrite Shaman, Steve Argyle. He's right there, and unfortunately, he can't sell anything with his actual Magic art anymore. They've disallowed him from selling playmats with like the card art on it. So I just grabbed the first playmat I see, which is this blood-covered Japanese cum slut with like a samurai sword, and she's like laying on the ground, licking the blood off the sword. And I'm like, "How much?" He's like, $20. He's like, "Do you want me to sign it?" I was like, "No, this is not gonna be something."
I'm not going to validate this piece of shit.
Yeah, but I played the rest of Vintage Champs with this basically fucking hentai porn mat, and it was pretty humiliating. But anyway, I later traded it because 90% of the Magic playing community actually enjoys watching women come in a bucket.
So do we want to talk a little bit about Grand Prix Las Vegas, though? We didn't really talk about it before.
You guys can talk about it. I don't play sealed, and I only bet on sport.
It seems like there's a lot of people who are going to Grand Prix Vegas just from looking at Twitter, listening to podcasts, looking at websites, that it's becoming more and more of a Grand Prix where it's, hey, Vegas is a cool place to go, so why don't we hit it up for this Grand Prix? I mean, I was listening to Brainstorm Brewery this afternoon, and they got a house specifically so that they'd have a bunch of people over and have a big party and have like drunk draft and all sorts of stuff. And it seems like there's a lot of people who are saying, yeah, I'm going to GP Vegas. I don't want a day two. I want to party with all my other Magic friends. And because of that, it's very quickly looking like this may blow the previous GP record out of the water just because Vegas is a city people want to be in.
I think as of today, we've had over 2,000 people pre-register for this tournament, which puts it at the third largest Grand Prix, and it's not even a day. It's not even 2 days before the tournament.
Well, it's trying to beat out Grand Prix Charlotte, and for those not aware, the city of Charlotte's cultural zenith is the fucking NASCAR Hall of Fame. So, I mean, it's not like it's trying to, Anyway, I mean, it's Las Vegas. It's a heck of a lot nicer place to go than Charlotte.
And I've also heard that based on Charlotte, Wizards has learned a lot about how to handle something this big, and they're trying to at least do a much better job in terms of staffing and how they're going to be able to fit that many people in one tournament and things of that nature, which is good because we don't want to see people starting to get into this attitude of, oh, a Grand Prix that's going to be big. Well, I don't want to go to that. It's going to be a clusterfuck.
On that note, I actually want to, if I was Wizards and seeing these tweets and reports about how many people are going to be showing up to this Grand Prix, I'd be thinking in my mind, how can I improve the tournament experience for the players? Step one, put the pairings on Twitter. Don't have
Which
to.
Star City already does.
Star City does, but Grand Prix policy dictates that you can't actually publish them to online media outside the Wizards website, which is updated like 4 hours after the fact. But by doing so, you improve the congestion that you would have at the pairings boards. One interesting thing that I did see at Grand Prix Denver, and I'm not sure how prevalent it is across Grand Prix, is to essentially have a scrolling digital board showing pairings.
Yes,
Now,
I saw that. I remember that.
and that's
And is that the same scroll that's built into the Wizards Reporter? Because the Reporter already has that functionality built in, but most people don't use it because it requires a projector or a giant screen or something of that nature.
I'm not sure specifically, but I imagine if they already know that they're going to have over 2,000 players, that renting a projector for $100 for the weekend or buying one for $100 for the weekend would be good enough.
What is this projector you speak of? Where is this technology available?
The second suggestion I would I would have for Wizards is to split the main event into 2 day one events. Essentially have a red pod and a green pod, or a
That's
blue
what they
pod, or
did
whatever
at Charlotte.
colors.
Yeah.
Essentially separated 2 separate tournaments that both feed into a day 2. This will allow segmenting the tournament population and improve the essentially the round turnover. So essentially double up on the scorekeepers, on the judging staff, so they don't have to run from one end to the room or the other. Considering we're already at 2,000 people, there's going to be 1,000 tables. It's going to be quite a challenge running across the room, literally.
Well, they did it at Charlotte because
table.
the software capped out, and so they did it by necessity at Charlotte, and it was fine once they did it. The issue, of course, was that they hadn't planned to do it, and thus had to kind of switch gears. So once they had Charlotte running, it was fine, but there was almost a 2-hour gap between when the tournament quote unquote started and when people actually got started playing. So had they known before that the software was going to cap out, I think they would have followed your suggestion initially, which was just breaking into 2 separate flights on the same day.
Even a third pod if you have enough floor space.
It was good for me because the line for Therese Nielsen was 0 while everyone was opening their dreadful gate crash packs or whatever garbage sealed was being played that day. So I was able to get through the line like 3 times while they were all wallowing in their tears. So.
Now, the third point I would have for Wizards, and this is probably on the questionable side, considering we're in the city of Las Vegas and their drinking laws allow for open containers in public, I would recommend opening up a bar in the venue. Now,
make some money.
Yeah, make some money. People are going to drop out after the first round after they open their foil goif plus regular goif. I mean, it's bound to happen. There's going to be over 12,000 packs of Modern Masters opened at this tournament.
I hope they have enough.
At $10 a pack at many stores.
At $10 a pack just for entry to the Grand Prix. I think the vendors are the ones who are going to really make out like bandits. Limited Grand Prix is just designed to feed all the extra card stock into the vendor's booth. But to make the player's life interesting, and considering the alcohol laws in Vegas, open up a bar, open up the Mox Cafe. Who the fuck gives a shit?
I mean, the other thing that Las Vegas has an infinite supply of is strippers. I mean, you could bring strippers.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If we're already opening a bar, let's bring some adult entertainment into this. Have Pod B be the 18-plus pod.
Yeah. Top 8 gets lap dances before they play, and you carry on.
I see Wizards as continuing their trend of poorly chosen locations to host during the hottest day of the year. Last year in the Grand Prix Atlanta was... Sean, it was the hottest day on record in like 20 years during that weekend.
Yeah, it was hot as balls.
I remember going out on that night and it was like 96 degrees and about 96% humidity at midnight.
And you're in downtown Atlanta, so it's like the fucking Walking Dead when you go out on Peachtree and like 60 homeless people just descend on you like fucking lice.
Well, on the subject of them doing it on a shitty weekend again, it's been 3 or 4 years since we've had a GP in Houston, and the reason they cited was that the last time they did a GP in Houston, it had bad turnout. Well, day 2 of the GP was Easter Sunday.
Wah, wah.
Wow.
Which I skipped out on going to church with my family because they had a vintage side event.
Hey, at least you know your priorities.
Yeah, they were going to have that Legacy, the last Legacy that Atlanta had with Star City was the Invitational, I think. And there was some fervor about, that was at the time they had just announced that some Sundays weren't going to be Legacy. So people were watching the turnouts for these pretty closely. Well, that Sunday was Super Bowl Sunday. And the Falcons were, 1 win away from getting to the Super Bowl. Well, if the Falcons had won the NFC Championship and gone to the Super Bowl, the Legacy turnout in Atlanta for that weekend would have been dick. And, knowing the people there, they would have looked at it and said, oh, there was no turnout. Anyway, what do y'all think of that? Just in general, I think the standard setup is just fucking miserable. I mean, at least give me Modern on Sunday. Well,
it's interesting that you mentioned that. when I started Legacy back in 2005, I remember like East Coast was the Legacy stronghold. I mean, it was North Virginia and the Northeast. So, what did Star City decide to announce today? That they're replacing the standard Legacy model of their Star City Open in Worcester, which is like Boston.
Welcome
proper.
to Worcester. $1.25, please.
Worcester, Boston. You know, they're replacing that standard.
Oh, you
Legacy
always open
setup?
on your fucking Thoughtseize. You fucking sack.
With sealed deck on Saturday and standard on Sunday.
What? Why not double Legacy?
Were they
I
trying to
know,
see how
right?
little money they can make?
So I'm tweeting out to Mr. Orange, at Mr. Orange, aka Evan Irwin, saying, you realize that this area has like one of the highest concentration of Legacy players, probably in the United States. Like, if there's anywhere to host a Legacy Open, it's in the Northeast.
Double fucking Legacy.
God,
You know what? Wait, hold on. Triple Legacy.
Yeah,
Triple
Friday,
Legacy.
Saturday, Sunday.
Saturday.
Screw the draft
Sunday.
open.
Like,
What-
run it.
Like, one thing I keep noticing about these event turnouts, especially for standard, is you're getting like 300, 400 people in a standard tournament. Now, when I'm thinking about, hey, what am I going to do on a Saturday afternoon? Yeah, I'll play in a 10, 11 round standard event for maybe getting top 64 for $50. That doesn't sound like a fun afternoon in my eyes.
When you're casting Think twice, too, the format is just fucking dog shit. So, I mean...
Well, I mean, that's not to say anything about the standard format itself. It's just, you're playing in a 10 to 11 round tournament, and you have to essentially do very, very, very well in order to even prize.
Or you play in an 8-round Legacy, go like 5-3, pass go, collect $50. Like, that's my idea of a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
That's right. I think one of the biggest draws to the Legacy Opens is that they're going to be relatively small compared to a standard or sealed deck event. But you'll be able to get out of there at a reasonable time, probably with some cash in hand. So now we're going to go into the wild, crazy, banned and restricted list speculation.
No,
part of the
we're not
podcast.
going to do that.
Jace is not getting unbanned in Modern. Just
That's-
throwing that out there.
No, definitely
Not at
Because though, like,
$140.
Why doesn't Wizards want me to have like a Thopter Foundry, Sensei Divining Top, Stoneforge Mystic deck? Why don't they want me? Is that
Well,
too good?
First of all, blue is not allowed to be good, so instead of printing cards that are good in blue, we just have to ban every combo ever. And
So
if
wait,
we
wait.
unban
So when is
Jace, then blue
Snapcaster-
might be good.
So when is Snapcaster Mage getting banned in Legacy in Modern?
That's
Tomorrow?
not part of any big combo yet, is it?
The combo is Snapcaster Mage Lightning Bolt. That's the fucking combo.
I could turn it into a combo. All I need is one Grizzlebrand.
Modern gets a bad rap. I'm an eternal get off my lawn player, but I occasionally go play Modern and I occasionally have fun just because I can build whatever.
That reminds me, I played Modern for the first time ever. I knew nothing about the format, and guy at my store said, "We need an 8th player. I'll pay for your entry, and you can have my extra deck." So I played, and I split top 4.
Yeah, it's
Skill
just
format.
it's a fun mid-rangey format. Nothing, you rarely get blown out. I mean, you rarely blow anybody out, but
I lost one game to Pod where I just didn't know one of his cards was part of the combo.
I looked at Modern from the eyes of a skeptic, saying this is a format that's not really got much going for it. It's a bunch of mid-range decks. What's the most powerful thing I can do? So 3 days before Grand Prix San Diego, I stumble upon a Grizzlebrand deck, and I said, "Throw caution to the wind. Let's see what happens." Ended up doing day 2 with a Grizzlebrand deck. Get recorded on a camera match. Turn 2 kill. Oh, you have Path to Exile? That's too bad. I have the modern version of Force of Will. I'm going to Is a Charm, pitch a Spirit Guide to help cast this on turn 2. After I reanimated Grizzlebrand, attacked, drew 21 cards, attacked and again, and attacked again.
Wow. See, this is my Modern experience was looking over somebody's deck list, and they were like, "Matt, from your Legacy experience, what could I do to improve my Modern deck?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, this deck needs Sensei's Divining Top."
And it needs to not
They're
play
like-
Shocklands.
They're like, "No, I'm like, okay, Jace. Definitely need some Jace. No. Ponder. No. Thopter Foundry. No.
How about Preordain? Just like something to dig. No, that's banned too.
And every single card I listed, they were like, Matt, all those cards are banned. I'm like, I don't want to play this format. And I just gave them back the deck.
My problem with Modern is I've bought 2 or 3 decks, and they just keep getting banned. And I know that there's many people who are doing this, who are saying, I'm not going to get into a format where a new deck gets banned every time a new list comes out. So I think that's where Wizards is really going to have to actually say, like, okay, we need to print answers instead of banning things, because eventually this ban list will be as big as the list of things that's illegal.
Yeah, I don't know. The format definitely needs some work. I think it needs to be a little bit better regulated. Legacy has its own problems, but Modern is just like, holy fucking shit, what are you kidding me? All these fun cards? Really? I can't have any of these.
Jeez. Let's keep hoping that Wizards does what they did with Modern, M14, and at least print very modern playable cards that have seen play in Legacy, reintroduce them back into Modern. I think that's the best approach going forward.
Well, guys, it's been real. My dog's about to shit on my foot, so I'm going to have to bail.
All
yeah,
right.
I think I gotta go too. So, listeners, thank you very much for listening to us rant.
If you guys want to contact us, we do have a Twitter account, at EternalMTG, and also email. Sam, I think you have the details for that one.
The email is everydayeternalcast@gmail.com, and I'm on Twitter every day now, and I don't know if everyone else is checking the email, but I've been poking at it, at least for now. So hopefully we can get some interaction and get some ideas about what people want to hear us talk about.
Shoot us some questions, feedback, concerns, or maybe even just tell Sean to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
We try, but he doesn't. Anyway, see you all, and have a good one.
All right, adios, everyone.
Adios.
Yep.